This edition of MacVoices is supported by Screencasts Online, your source for new Mac and iOS tutorials every week. To learn more and for a 14-day free trial, visit screencastsonline.com. And by Smile, the makers of PDF Pen, PDF Pen Pro, PDF Pen for iPad and iPhone, PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPad and iPhone, Text Expander Touch, and Disk Label. Find out more about all their great products at smilesoftware.com. Welcome back to Mac Voices. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we have all kind of things coming from Apple this fall. We've seen the announcements. The first thing we get to get our hands on is iOS 9. And I can't think of anybody else better to talk about iOS 9 with and to teach us about it than Mr. Josh Centers. He's the author of iOS 9, a Take Control Crash Course. Josh, it's great to see you.
Thanks for having me back, Chuck.
Always a pleasure, always a pleasure. And I'm really excited because you now have not just an iOS Take Control book, but a crash course book. And I'll let you explain what the crash courses are for those who may not be familiar with the crash course format.
So the way I like to describe the crash course is that it's a tech book for people who hate reading tech books. And the big difference, if you're used to our normal Take Control titles, which are all just one column, they're just very straightforward. The crash course titles are two columns, and the left column is mostly text, and the right column is mostly visuals with some sidebars and things like that. So it's a very browsable, very skimmable format. It's the kind of thing you can just jump in, pick out what you want, pick out what you need to know, and then get on with something else. And you come back to it later and just refer to it how you like. It's, no one's expecting you to, read through this thing cover to cover. I mean, you can if you'd like. It's totally readable that way. But that's kind of the general idea. That's the name Crash Course. You can get up and going in just a few minutes.
iOS 9 would seem to be almost a perfect fit for the crash course format because there's, as we were saying pre-interview, there's so many little things here that kind of add up to iOS 9, and you may not be aware of all of them, and you may stumble across some, and so this makes it a little more of a cohesive, orderly way to discover those things. And even if you don't want to pay attention to it now, when you do stumble across it, you can jump right to that section of the book. Right,
and we start the book off after the introduction with a What's New chapter, and it's just a list of everything that's new in iOS 9, including some things I haven't seen in other lists that we stumbled across. Like, here's one, for instance, most people don't know about. Of course, search is better in iOS 9. They talked about that at WWDC. But search and mail is better, actually, because you finally have a progress bar. So you can actually see how your search is doing instead of it just sitting there, and you don't know when things are going to be finished. It also gives you search suggestions in mail. So, I can start typing someone's name and it fills in the rest for me. I can see, all the emails, from that person or to that person. So, that's pretty great. But, yeah, we start off right away telling you everything that's new. So, if you don't need to learn the ins and outs of iOS, if you feel like you're an iOS Jedi, then you can just jump in right away and see what's new and get on about your business. And then you could jump to the section explaining how the new features work, read over that, then you know what to do, and you can be on your way.
So how did you approach and ultimately report on iOS 9 in this fashion? Is it a situation where you kind of jump from topic to topic, or do you go from app to app, or the overall system? There's so many options here. I can think of a way to organize this.
Well, that's an interesting question. The way we kind of have this split out is we start with the basic user interface elements. So so we have the what's new, what to check after you install, and then we start with the lock screen, and then move on to Control Center, the home screen, and all the way through like Siri and share sheets, things like that. And then we talk about some of the online stuff, like we talk about iCloud, the App Store, family sharing. And then we move on to the apps that are built in. A big focus on camera and photos, because I think that's a huge feature for most people. There's an entire chapter about mail. And if you read the iOS book, you might remember we had two chapters. It was kind of awkwardly split because we wanted to cover the basics of mail and then what was new in mail, because we wanted it to be so if you already knew how to use mail and you just wanted to know what was new, you could jump straight in there. But now we've got it split up so will actually merge back together. So that's one unified chapter, and the new stuff's highlighted. So that way, it's a little smoother to get through, but it's also good for people who don't know everything about mail. We talk about mapping. We talk about the new transit directions. There's a new chapter about Wallet, which replaces Passbook, and that holds all your Apple Pay cards, reward cards, that kind of thing. And then we have, for the stuff we don't go into detail on, we have a chapter about the additional Apple apps. We talk about, that's where we talk about, briefly things like, notes. Find My Friends in Maps now. I'm trying to remember all this stuff. So we talk about the miscellaneous Apple apps in that, like Airport Utility, the Apple Store, GarageBand, and then we recommend some apps. And then the end of the book covers broader topics like privacy, saving your battery life, accessibility, and things like that.
Again, there's so many things in this. And then just to make it more interesting, we're talking about iOS 9, which means that you have features on the iPhone and the iPad that are often different.
Right, and that's one of the challenges of writing about iOS. And it's one of those things I couldn't do alone. And I had a lot of help from Adam, Tanya, and Michael Cohen, who did tech editing for this book. And all of us going through on different devices and testing things. And it's something people don't talk about much because Apple has smoothed it out. They've hit it so well, but there's so much fragmentation between devices now. Not only in like what features work with which devices, and we've seen some problems with that with some folks, but also how they work. I can write, okay, come over here and tap this button, and then someone will look at another device, like iPhone to iPad, and they'll say, "Well, that button isn't there. It's over here." So that's one of the things that's really tricky, and we have to go through everything at least twice just to make sure all the instructions are correct, that everything factually works out and it's easy to follow. It's with almost any of their operating system, like if you're covering OS 10, if you're covering watch OS, then everything works the one way. But iOS is almost like, well, it's like several different operating systems all under one banner. That's tricky. And but I think we've done a pretty good job of making it so no matter what device you're on, you'll be able to follow through.
Since we're on we'll use the word fragmentation, which is an interesting word, because that always is a little bit of a dark word, a bad word, and I have to say that for most part, in my limited experience with iOS 9, you've spent a lot of time with the betas, and I should say that I didn't touch any of the betas. I stayed away from the betas. I wanted just the fresh experience from going to one to the other. I kind of like the idea that certain things don't work the same way because these are two different sized devices. The interface opportunities for each are different. The optimization of one, would hurt it on the other or vice versa. So yeah, they put two different interfaces on it, and for the most part, I think they make sense.
Right, and I totally agree with you there. I'm just talking about from the nerd tech writer aspect, which most people don't have to deal with, right? Most people don't have that problem, and Apple knows that. But yeah, and as someone who has an iPad that doesn't get much use, I have an iPad Air, the first gen, and it's mostly stayed in a drawer until I installed iOS 9. And there are so many great features in iOS 9 that really take advantage of all the extra screen space. You have things like slide over, picture-in-picture. If you have an iPad Air 2, you have split screen where you can run two apps side by side. And that even extends to smaller things. Like, for instance, folders hold 16 apps per page now. Before it was limited to 9 like the iPhone. But, now it takes advantage of that screen real estate. Extra shortcuts on the quick type bar and the keyboard. Just lots of things like that that actually make you feel like picking up your iPad. The iPad no longer doesn't feel like just a big iPod Touch anymore. It feels like it's its own device that actually takes advantage of that screen real estate.
Let's go with the iPad for just a second. How do you feel about the new keyboard touchpad thing?
Oh yeah. It's we call it trackpad mode, and I don't edit text much on my iPad. Professionally, but it's one of those things that it's just so much better than the old way of doing it because Before you'd have to put your finger in the text field and try to press it in such a way that the magnifying glass popped up, then move the cursor around and all that. With the new trackpad mode, especially if you're used to a trackpad, which I think most Apple users are, it's just so intuitive. You put two fingers down and start moving them. It does take a little bit of a learning curve, and we cover this in the book. But for instance, you put two fingers down. If you don't move them right away, if you hold them down for a second, they actually starts selecting text. And then if you single tap inside of a word, that will select a word. If you double tap inside of a word with the two fingers, it'll select an entire line. And I talk about all that in the book. And those things, though, once you practice it, it makes editing text so much faster in the iPad. So if that's something you do, then yeah, you need to update right away.
I especially like the fact that now you can use that mode and you're not blocking your view with your own hands or fingers too. You can see what you're trying to select, and I think it makes it a lot easier to just manipulate, because it's a lot more like using a trackpad.
Mm-hmm.
How about talk a little bit about split screen mode, because that's something that I think a lot of us have been waiting for, even those of us who don't have an iPad Pro, because nobody does yet.
Right.
But I was experimenting with that. That was one of the first things I wanted to try, and even on an iPad Air, I find it very useful. I was doing some things last night, and it was the first time. Well, obviously, it's the first time I could do it, but I'm realizing just how useful it will be on an iPad.
Right. Well, it's kind of there's two things going on there. You have two features. You have one called slide over, and then you have one called split screen. Split screen only works on the iPad Air too, and this is a little embarrassing, but I actually had to get some help from Adam and Tiny Inks to fill that section in, because I didn't actually have an iPad Air 2 around to test that with. But now, if you have an iPad Air in models around that era, there is something called slide over, and it's also very handy. Now, the difference is split screen. You have two full apps side by side, and they're totally, you can do both at once, and they're totally doing their thing. Slide over is essentially you're in one app and you slide an app partially over the one you're in, so it fits into a column, almost sort of like an iPhone app. So you can slide it over, do something in that app, slide it back out of your way, and carry on with the app you're in without having to switch between apps constantly. And now that developers are actually putting apps in the App Store that take advantage of it, it's really starting to shine, because when I was running the betas, it was mostly only Apple's apps and a couple of betas I was running that had that capability. But now I can bring up the Twitter app. The official Twitter app is one of the first ones that supports slide overs. So it's pretty great to be browsing the web. I can pull that over, check my tweets, tweet out something, whatever, slide it back out of the way, and I'm on my way. There's also a third new multitasking feature for the iPad, and this is a great one. It's called Picture in Picture. So if you're watching video in a supported app, now that's the key, though. It has to be a supported app. I don't think YouTube, the app, supports this yet. But maybe by the time you see this, it will. Hopefully it will. But if you want to see an example, Apple's built-in videos app for iTunes stuff, that supports it. So what you can do is you start watching a video, you're watching it full screen, you press the home button, and it shrinks down into a little window. And then you can go about doing other stuff like browsing the web or doing your taxes or whatever it is you're doing, and you can still keep watching your video in a little window that you can drag around the screen and rearrange and all that. And that's a really great feature.
Some of these things, Josh, it seems like they're so obvious, but I don't think they were obvious until all of us got a chance to use the iPad and really understand how it was going to change our lives or what we could do with it. And then you said, okay, it would be nice to have side by side. The swipe over, I really like. The picture in picture is genius, because that's, which one of us do one thing anymore at a time? I know there, in fact, there was an argument, I think it was yesterday or today, now I've forgotten, on Twitter, about full screen mode, even on the Mac. But I always have two things going. So the idea that I may be able to play a video podcast or a movie or TV show in one window, and like you say, be browsing the web or working on a document in the other is absolutely perfect.
I'll tell you something else that's fantastic too, is that you can, with the picture-in-picture window, you can even dock it off screen. Like if you don't care about the video, if you're just listening to audio, like you're listening to music on YouTube, or you're listening to like where the campaign's going on right now, the big presidential campaign's going on right now. So you can listen to a speech in the background without having to actually watch it. Or and I know this is kind of an odd case, but some apps don't do AirPlay well when they're in the background. So if you want to have that app in the foreground for AirPlay, but but don't actually want to watch that on your iPad, you can just slide it out of your way there and keep showing on your Apple TV.
This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of PDF Pen, PDF Pen Pro, PDF Pen for iPad and iPhone, PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPhone and iPad, Text Expander Touch, and Disk Label. Find out more about all their great products at smilesoftware.com. The Smile team has been busy again, rolling out small but significant improvements to two of my favorite productivity utilities. The latest version of PDF Pen improves scanning significantly from both a performance and reliability standpoint, making it faster and more stable than ever. Faster and more stable are always good things, especially when you're trying to churn through a pile of PDFs of contracts or research papers, or even just old magazine scans. Whatever you're trying to get into PDF Pen as editable text, you will now do it faster and with even greater reliability. The latest version of Text Expander fixes the secure input notification that was so annoying in the Chrome browser, and also improves suggested snippets by excluding most single words found in a dictionary. That second one is huge, since it improves one of the very best new features of Text Expander, the ability to recognize and suggest snippets for your frequently typed text. If you pay attention to the suggestions, you'll be surprised at just how much time and effort Text Expander can save. Of course, those are just a couple of the features of these two great programs. For example, PDF Pen lets you redact information from prying eyes. And I don't just mean cover it up, I mean redact it so that it's gone from the PDF Pen you send the opposition. And Text Expander doesn't just insert text. You can load all sorts of things into a snippet. Images, graphic signatures, HTML code snippets, and much more. You need to try out both of these great utilities, and you can do it for free by going right now to smilesoftware.com and downloading the free demo versions. Then, buy directly from Smile when you're ready, and enjoy their regular stream of updates that just keep making their software and your life better. That's smilesoftware.com for free demo versions of Text Expander and PDF Pen. Do it now and tell them Chuck sent you. Smile, the makers of world-class software. Thanks to Smile for being the longest-running sponsor of MacVoices. You mentioned something too. I want to make sure we specify that a lot of apps have to be written to support these modes. It's not just you're going to be able to open up your iPad and your two favorite apps, and they're going to automatically support this. So this is a time to be refreshing, making sure you're keeping up with your updates. And I know I've been downloading a lot of updates because it seems like a lot of the developers are really anxious to take advantage of some of these new features.
Right. And that's something to be aware of, because the apps that support this stuff, now Apple's been warning them for years now. I think it's been at least a year since they told them at WWDC, you really need to support resizing and scaling and the responsive stuff. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And the developers that took that advice and actually acted accordingly, which I'm sure it's not easy to adapt your app for that, but the ones that did last year are ready to go for the iPad. And now the guys that just blew them off are like, crap, what are we going to do? So some of your favorite apps may take a while if they didn't take Apple entirely seriously there.
We're talking a lot about the iPad. How about some of the new features and how they apply to the iPhone? What did you find there that you think is the most useful or the most exciting?
I think specifically for the iPhone, I think the most interesting thing is what's called low power mode. Now, Apple says that they've tweaked iOS 9 so you get an extra hour of battery life regardless on your iPhone. And that's through some things like, for instance, if the front sensor here, the light sensor, does not detect light, it will keep the screen off when you get a notification. So if the phone's in your pocket, your phone's not going to just keep lighting up when you can't look at it, which is pretty smart. I don't know why they didn't do that before. But what low power mode is that it's kind of like downgrading your iPhone in a way, because it shuts off all the background processes. It shuts off automatic mail retrieval. It shuts off, all that stuff going, iCloud sync, all that stuff that goes on in the background. It shuts that off. So you have to do that manually. Like, you have to check your email manually. iMessages still come through okay, that sort of stuff. But syncing, mail retrieval, that sort of stuff all turns manual. Now you can enable this yourself in settings battery, but what it does by default is when you drop to 20% battery life, which is usually when they tell you need to start charging your battery. Instead, they say, "Would you like to turn on low power mode?" And you tap low power mode, and that turns it on. Your battery icon goes yellow instead of red or green, and that lets you know you're in low power mode. And so it shuts those features off, but in exchange, they say you get up to about 3 extra hours of battery life. And in my experience, that's been very true. It seems like the battery doesn't really go down at all when the phone's not being used, when it's in low power mode. So that's a pretty spectacular feature.
Josh, something I've noticed on my phone and my iPad for that matter, and I may be projecting here, but everything feels snappier. We all have those little mouse trails that we run between apps or in our own little workflows, and I swear that it's not. I mean, we're not talking about 10-second changes here, but just snappier. Just feels like where before I might have to pause between doing something, all of a sudden I don't have to pause anymore if I don't want to, and that is just purely in software. That's with no hardware upgrades, and that's something I always marvel when that kind of thing happens when these updates come out.
Right, and that I think that's a side effect of trying to make iOS more just overall efficient. In many ways, this is kind of like a snow leopard year for Apple. With El Cap and iOS 9, they heard all the complaints about things being unstable, about things only being halfway implemented, things not working, and so it feels like that they really sat down and dedicate themselves to quality and polish, and that shows in a lot of ways. It's hard for me to compare because I've been running betas all summer, so I went from like beta 1 to it's always funny. This is the second time I've written about iOS as it's being developed, and it always seems like the best beta is the very last one, and then when the GM comes out, the Golden Master, the one that is supposed to be what everyone gets, that's the buggiest one of all. I guess because they put the code for the new iPhones in. I'm not sure what happens there, but it's always between beta and Golden Master that things kind of seem to fall apart. Things suddenly get slow and all that. Fortunately, there was actually a small update when iOS 9 came out. It was like only about 46 megabytes or so, and that seemed to fix some of the problems. Although there's still some bugs left over. Like, for instance, when I bring up the Podcasts app, which has been redesigned in iOS 9. There's no jump forward or back. There's no skip buttons. there's just the play button. So there are still some rough edges, but I will say iOS 9 at this point is way better than iOS 8 was. And actually, as a matter of fact, when I first went to the iOS 9 beta, it felt snappier and more stable to me than the current version of iOS 8 at the time.
As we record this, we're seeing adoption rates. There are different reports coming out about how quickly it's being adopted. I did something I never do, and I certainly don't encourage people to do, and that is, I downloaded it within about, 10 minutes of it being released, and couldn't wait, unreasonably couldn't wait, and especially when it comes to my phone. I mean, that's a production machine in my eyes, and so it was dangerous to do, but I did a backup and did it anyway. And I've had no issues, and I haven't really seen anyone having issues, or at least not being very vocal about it. Is that the same thing you're seeing?
I haven't heard many complaints yet, which, being the managing editor of Tidbits, I usually hear, all the complaints when Apple updates an operating system. I heard tons of complaints about iOS 8. I heard, of course, I heard a lot of complaints about Yosemite. But yeah, with iOS 9, I haven't heard many. I've heard some people say they've had problems updating iOS 9 with Snow Leopard, which I think at that point we're dealing with an entirely different problem. But for the most part, people seem pretty happy with iOS 9. There haven't been any show-stopping bugs reported. Um, pretty stable so far. Pretty fast. It doesn't seem to be breaking a lot of apps. It's compatible with all the same hardware as iOS 8. And actually, it should save you some space because the install sizes are a lot more reasonable than iOS 8. iOS 8 was something like 8 gigs or so, and iOS 9, the install sizes are much, much smaller. So, if you're an iPhone user, you'll probably gain a gigabyte or two of storage space back by updating to iOS 9.
So I'm gathering that you would agree with me that at the moment, again, you always want to do that backup. We can't use that word enough, backup. But as long as you do a backup before you do it, there's no reason not to just jump right in with both feet at this point.
Yeah, I mean it's a great update. Not many problems, and like I said, on the iPhone, you're going to gain a gigabyte or two of storage space. You're probably going to gain some more battery life. If you're on the iPad, even if your iPad doesn't support all the new whiz-bang features, you're still going to get some new stuff that takes advantage of that extra screen space. So yeah, it's absolutely worth upgrading. But I'll put it to you like this: my wife's iPhone, I think it was about a month or two after after we released the iOS 8 book before I updated her to iOS 8. And even the day before iOS 8 came out, I was warning people to not update yet. I'm like, don't get it yet because there's a lot of things that don't work. And there's a lot of things that didn't work until the day or the day after release because there's so many huge changes in iOS 8 on the back end. But yeah, this update, I'm probably going to put her on iOS 9 this weekend at the latest.
This edition of Mac Voices is supported by Screencasts Online, your source for new Mac and iOS tutorials every week. To learn more, and for a 14-day free trial, visit screencastsonline.com. One thing we can all agree on: Don McAllister's Screencasts Online is the gold standard for screencast tutorials. Each week, Screencasts Online delivers a brand new Mac tutorial and also a brand new iOS tutorial. That means each week you get to learn something new for your Mac, iOS device, or both. And we're talking about in-depth, step-by-step instruction, not just quick overviews. And if that isn't enough, Screencasts Online Monthly Magazine brings interesting and informative articles to you each month via Apple's newsstand. With a back catalog of over 500 video tutorials, Screencasts Online is one of the most complete video resources for learning about Apple-oriented software on the web. You can enjoy a 14-day free trial to find out that Screencasts Online is right for you, then sign up for a quarterly or yearly subscription that includes everything, including Screencasts Online magazine. Just visit screencastsonline.com to sign up. Screencasts Online, video tutorials you will really watch and enjoy. Thanks to Screencasts Online for their support of Mac Voices. You said something that I really hadn't thought about in relation to iOS 9, and that is the El Capitan year, that this is more of a year of polishing and things. And I guess because my perception is that there are quite a few new features here. They may not be major features depending on how you use your devices, but iOS 9 hasn't really been postured in quite that way, and yet you've been working with the betas, you wrote the book, so you should know.
Yeah, I mean it's not about one huge thing or even a lot of huge things. It's lots, like even more so than iOS 8, which iOS 8 on the front end for the user. There wasn't a lot different, but the back end was tons of changes. The whole extension system. This whole the handoff, all these different continuity, all these different things that Apple implement on the back end were just huge things to the infrastructure of iOS 8. And so while it didn't look that much different than iOS 7, it's suddenly things didn't work right because there was so much infrastructure change. In iOS 9, it adds some serious developer capabilities. Don't get me wrong, and we can talk about some of those here in a minute. But stuff like intelligence, stuff like Siri suggestions, these search improvements, the refinements to the built-in apps, like the new stuff they add in Notes. Those aren't things that are they're not groundbreaking, but they are refinements, and and they're not done in such a way. They're not so deep in the OS that they break stuff, but they are And it's not like they can say there's one big marquee thing with iOS 9, but there are so many great user-facing polishes to this. So many refinements that I think everyone who uses iOS is really going to appreciate those things, and it's going to lead to less frustration and breakage and developer turmoil.
You mentioned the developers. Let's talk about it from a developer's perspective. Does iOS 9 give developers a lot of new capabilities they absolutely didn't have before, or is it the same thing, sort of a refinement of what they could do?
Well, in a lot of ways, it is refinement, and there are definitely some new stuff there that some of it you're already seeing. For instance, Safari now supports content blockers, which has been fairly controversial because that means ad blockers for Safari in iOS, which I've been running Marker Armit's Piece, which is a combination of a privacy filter and ad blocker. And I'll be honest with you, Chuck, it's been fantastic. I don't see the huge pop-ups anymore, the sleazy popovers with the little tiny X button, the stuff that reroutes me to the App Store, all that stuff. And web pages load faster. I've been on Twitter all day reading people saying how terrible you are if you run an ad blocker. And frankly, I don't care because like the web is just so much better with these things, so they can figure something else out. So that's one of the huge things that if you're an iOS user, you can see right now. If you go to the App Store and search for ad blocker, there's one called Crystal. There's Peace. And there's a few other ones. And this is just getting started too, and it's already a huge thing. In fact, I think as I say this, Peace is the top paid app in the App Store. And I made the point to people who are defending ads and saying ad blocker is bad. I'm like, people hate paying for software, but they're willing to pay the $3 to get rid of these ads. So that should tell you something. So that's I think in terms of total ramifications, that's probably the biggest thing. The other really exciting feature, and I haven't seen much of this yet, but developers can now tie their apps into Spotlight search. So, for instance, if you have a recipe app, you have, like, say, a bacon recipe in. Well, if you search for bacon in Spotlight, in theory, it will reveal some of those recipes in that app. And then you also have stuff like deep linking, which it's kind of a hard thing to explain, but kind of the idea would be, if you clicked on a Twitter link, that it could open that up in the Twitter app. The Twitter app doesn't do that yet. I'm not sure developers are really taking good advantage of that just yet, but that will come with time. So those are all things to be on the lookout for, and I think it's kind of like iOS 8. A lot of the new stuff in iOS 8 for developers wasn't obvious immediately. It took a while for all that stuff to really come through and mature, and you see, oh yeah, that's what you can do with that. So it's going to be like that with iOS 9. And once the Spotlight integration, deep linking, and all that stuff comes in, I think that's going to really change the way people use iOS.
I'm going to do my very best not to get into the ad blocker thing because that's a whole other show. I'm so desperate to comment, and I'm not going to.
That's a Mac jury right there.
Yeah, that's a big Mac jury, yeah. I wouldn't be doing my job, and maybe the best place to wrap up with this is some of the camera capabilities, because that seems to be a big thing, and it's going to be a bigger thing next week or 2 weeks from now when we get the new version of the iPhones. What has been done in iOS 9, and how do you cover that in the book?
So there isn't a ton of new stuff in terms of cameras, at least not yet. Of course, the live photo stuff is coming, and that's all pretty cool. I will just say personally, one of the things I wanted forever was a built-in album for screenshots, because I take so many screenshots. I took about 700 for this book. I didn't put all those in the book, but you have to take lots of them to have a selection, and now I can select all those. I can delete them from my phone. I can delete them from my iCloud photo library, and that's pretty great. There's also a selfie album built in, which is pretty great. And then that collects all the photos taken with the front-facing camera in the iPhone. So that's going to be handy for a lot of people. I'll tell you one little thing, a couple little things I like. Like I said, not a ton of new stuff with photos and camera. Although, well, there is one thing with photos. There's now a scrubber. So if you have one photo selected, and instead of having to back out to see what else is in the album, you have thumbnails, like a strip of thumbnails. You can slide your thumb across to see what else is in that album. I tell you, one little thing I really love, and this is one of those things they didn't advertise. If you're watching a video on in the Photos app, like a video you took, you can zoom in on it now. You can pinch to zoom, which that's brand new in iOS 9, and that's a really neat thing. Yes, another slight thing. When you're taking a video, you can leave the flashlight on now. You can leave the camera flash on. So if you take a video in the dark or something, you no longer have to try to fiddle with that or try to trick it. Now you can just turn that on, leave it on, and keep it on.
This is exactly why you need this book. And I seem to say this at the end of most Take Control interviews, but there's so many little things here, but they add up to a lot of improvements. Not everyone is going to be for you, but a lot of them will be. And they may cure simple annoyances, or they may give you a capability you've wished you had and you just, have kind of forgotten about, and now all of a sudden it's there. So, go get it. Josh, tell us about the specifics of the book. How many pages? What kind of cost is there? The obvious things.
It is $15, and it's 121 pages. I believe if you have the iOS 8 book, I believe it's a free update. Don't quote me on that, but it's if you didn't get the iOS 8 book, I know for sure it's $15, 121 pages. Now that's 121 pages of two columns, so that's like having a 242 page book just squeezed in real tight. So, and you can get that at takecontrolbooks.com.
But don't let that intimidate you, folks, the number of pages. I mean, because, again, these crash courses are the ideal way to look at features you want to look at, skip over the ones you don't, or at least not right now, and then come back to them and sort of consume it in bite-sized bits.
Absolutely. And there is a free sample you can download and check it out and see if you like the format and all that.
Yeah, I've there's been a lot of coverage of iOS 9 over the past couple of days, and to be honest with you, I find some of the articles very good. I find some of them very frustrating. Here are the 50 new things you need to know in iOS 9, and it's like, okay, right. That's nice because they make me aware of a couple things, but then they describe them in 2 sentences, and it's like, well, that doesn't do much for me.
Right.
How do I take advantage of them, or how do I optimize the performance? So
right. Well, I have friends, and they're great writers, but there seems to be this perverse thing in the Apple community where people take a lot of pride in writing the longest reviews possible of things. It's like, I wrote a 500-page iOS 9 review. It's like, that's great, but I don't know if many people are going to read that all the way. I'm sorry to tell you. So if you get my book, it's let's see, if you just want to know what's new in iOS 9, that's 7 pages. We give you probably at least a good paragraph in each new thing, unless it's just super small. But if you want more detail, you just click the link we have, and most of these things do have links, and then you can go read the full topic on it. So it's one of those things, you could probably spend, this book probably has a shelf life of about a year or so. You could probably spend that entire year, if you're interested, just browsing the What's New section at your leisure, and then, oh, that looks neat. Click on that and go, check out that topic. So it's very browsable, very clickable. I try not to take up too much of your time when we publish these things. So yeah, it's good bathroom reading.
Yeah, you bring up the long reviews, and I know there's been some controversy on Twitter and about the way that some people are, viewing other people's reviews of this. And it's like, there's room for everyone here. If you want something in-depth and intensive, you won't have any trouble finding it. If you want the quick hits, but I get frustrated with the quick hits because they don't give me enough. The most they do is, well, I might as well just look at a list of things as opposed to learning anything about it.
You got the BuzzFeed approach, which is like a Letterman top 10 list, and then you have the people who want to do the Syracusean route, of writing a Homer epic, about iOS 9, and those are great for certain people. This is kind of in the middle. This is kind of you want some detail, but you don't want to read the Iliad for iOS 9. You just want to read something that's kind of quick but has some meat to it, and that's what we're offering here for your $15.
There's a Ulysses joke in here somewhere, but I'm not going to do it. So it's it's iOS 9, a Take Control crash course by Mr. Josh Centers. Josh, it's great to see you. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Thanks for having me, Chuck.
We'll do it again.
All right.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. I'm excited about iOS 9. I'm excited to get Josh's book and learn more about it because I know there's more in there that I haven't had a chance to play with that will make me more productive or at least make it more useful. I hope you will find the same thing. And if you have a favorite feature, drop me an email or find me on Twitter and let me know. I'm curious to see what is going to be, what's going to punch your buttons as opposed to mine and as opposed to everyone else. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the MacVoices blog. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at MacVoices.com/newsletter. Do more with your Apple tech by subscribing to the free MacVoices magazine on Flipboard by visiting MacVoices.com/magazine. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.